Hi everyone, welcome to my session, The Ins and Outs of the Tgmd 3. My name is Sutar and I am a professor at MSU Mankato, and I've been training Dape teachers for over 25 years, and I'm excited to be sharing this new assessment instrument with you at the virtual Minnesota Dape conference. I hope by the end of the session you can learn a few new things about the Tgmd 3. Then if you've got further questions, you've got my email and my Twitter handle there to connect with me in the future. As you can see from this list of items on the locomotor subtest, the biggest changes between the Tgmd 2 and 3 is that the leap has been removed and the skip has been added back in. So that makes some people very happy and it makes some people very sad. But the skip was in the initial Tgmd assessment. They removed it for the 2 and now they've added it back in the locomotor subtest. In the Tgmd 3 ball skills subtest, so they've changed the name of the subtest from object control to ball skills. They've done a bit more changing here. You could see they have deleted the underhand roll and they have added the underhand throw and a forehand strike of a self-bounced ball. And I'll go through each of the criteria for each of those as we move a little bit closer into the components. The score sheet or the record form is basically the same, a few differences, but you can see each of the skills is identified with the directions of the equipment that might be needed or the space that might be needed for the particular skill. And then it's in the middle column, it identifies where you need to place that equipment if you need to place it anywhere, and then it gives some specific directions as to what you're going to need to specifically tell the child what to do. And then it reminds you to complete a second trial. And the third column is the performance criteria that needs to be observed for that particular skill. So again, nothing hugely different, but again, I would encourage you to look very specifically at the performance criteria because the language has changed a bit in each one of those. And then you see the gallop here for criteria, maintaining a consistent rhythmic pattern for 4 consecutive gallops, similar to what we might have seen in the previous Tgmd 2. The hop and the skip, again, similarly, we've got the same setup with the equipment needs or the space needs. Here are the directions, as well as reminding you to repeat the second trial. Here are the criteria. And the skip, very similar to what we saw in the original Tgmd assessment. Okay, that rhythmical alternating skips is the third criteria that's important for them to show us. And the final 2 locomotor skills, the horizontal jump and the slide, again, not hugely different, but take a look at the specific language in the performance criteria, making sure that you're fully aware of what that might be for each of these 2 skill components. When we look at, again, the ball skills subtest, the 2-hand strike of a stationary ball has been in the Tgmd 2. Again, some things have changed with the criteria a little bit. So this direction, making contact with the ball and sending it in a direction of straight ahead. So again, the specific directions ask you to point straight ahead to notify to the student where that ball should be traveling upon contact. And then here's one of the new additions, a 1-hand forehand strike of a self-bounced ball. So you're going to need a tennis ball, and again, make sure that it has some bounce in it so it hasn't been sitting in your equipment room for a while. Using a plastic paddle, and then of course some type of wall surface to bounce toward. And again, using the equipment, tell the child to hold the ball up, drop it. We want it to bounce up to their waist or about waist height, and then their task is to off of that bounce, hit the ball toward the wall. And again, your job to point toward the wall so they know the direction that it's going to take. And you could imagine this is a relatively complex skill. So again, it may be a struggle spot, or they may be really good at it. The one-hand stationary dribble and the two-hand catch, those are criteria or skills that were in the existing Tgmd 2, but again, the language for the directions as well as the performance criteria need to be reviewed to make sure you know specifically what you're looking for and asking them to do. The kicking a stationary ball, again, in the Tgmd 2, but review the criteria, the equipment that you might need, as well as the specific directions that the child is supposed to do. The overhand throw is similar, using a tennis ball, stepping hard or throwing hard, which forces them to step with the opposite foot, and the nice follow through. And then the underhand throw is another new item, again using that tennis ball and some space, taping 15 feet from the wall, and again behind that wall, behind the tape, face the wall, throw the ball underhand so that it hits the wall. And again, looking at that criteria that might be different or new for them if they haven't done underhand throw. So the administration details, some have transferred over from the Tgmd 2 to the Tgmd 3. With all good assessments, we want to provide the students with a good demonstration, a correct demonstration of the skill. And in your demonstration, making sure that you include all of the performance criteria so that they can see those performance criteria. We all can muscle the ball without stepping with opposition. And so again, the student is more than likely going to mimic us. So making sure that you're including all of the performance criteria that you're going to assess them on in your demonstration. Similarly to the Tgmd 2, you're going to provide them with a practice trial, and then you will provide them with 2 trials that you score. Again, as you're scoring those trials, if you happen to miss their performance on a specific criteria, it is okay or permissible to allow an additional trial, but you're only going to score that performance criteria that you missed their performance up. And so not rescoring the whole task, again, just the performance criteria that you could not determine if they were successful or not. And similarly, to think about if you see them with the catching, for example, and they have missed the catch because you threw an uncatchable ball to them, again, that would deserve a retrial, give them another trial because of your poor throw. So making sure that you practice so that you're able to provide them with a quality throw, for example, in that task. The scoring details, not much has changed there, but I do want to go through a sample score sheet here in a couple minutes. Each performance criterion is going to earn a 1 or a 0. You'll score a 1 if their performance correctly met the criteria, and they'll receive a 0 if their performance did not correctly meet that performance criteria. And we know that being a good observer is quite challenging when kids are moving a mile a minute. And I always like to suggest to my teacher candidates that if you get permission to record your assessments, that it's helpful to be able to go back and replay and replay and replay the student performing the task so that you can correctly score, accurately score their performance based upon what they did, not what you guess or think that they might have scored. The performance criteria score, again, I'll go through this in a little video, but we calculate the score for trial 1 and trial 2, and then there's a total score column that you'll put that in there. So any total score cannot be greater than 2 because 1 plus 1 is 2. And then each of the skill scores within a subtest, the locomotor or the ball skills subtest, they'll all be summed so that you get a subtest raw score. And that's what these 2 bullets talk about here. And again, I've got a couple specific videos to show you how to do that. The examiner record form looks a little different, but it has all of the information that we saw on the Tgmd too, just maybe arranged a little differently. So the first section talks about the information for the student that you'll provide, their name, date tested, birth date. You'll have to calculate their chronological age, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. Their sex, the school, their hand and foot preference, your name and your title. Section 2 is going to be where you record their performances. Section 3 is their composite performance. And then Section 4 includes the descriptive terms based upon their gross motor index score. Sometimes, again, parents attach meaning to this descriptive term, even though it might not be the most valid response. They surely know what above average means compared to below average or impaired or delayed. The Tgmd3 examiner record form is very similar to the Tgmd2 form. This first section, you're going to identify the student's name, the date that you tested the student, the birth date. You'll calculate their chronological age. You'll determine their sex, the school, their hand and foot preference, and then of course your name and title. The Section 2 information again is pretty similar. We're going to calculate and determine their raw scores for the 2 subtests. You'll use the norming tables for their age equivalent, percentile rank, and scaled scores. Determine their confidence interval if that is of interest to you. And finally, Section 3, the composite performance, looking at the gross motor composite, some of the scaled scores using the norming tables for the percentile rank and the gross motor index and the confidence intervals if those are of benefit to you. Similarly, when you go to record the performance of each of the skills that you're assessing, I completed the run and the gallop with some data. Each child gets 2 trials, as I talked about earlier. A 1 indicates a score that they performed that criteria successfully. A 0 equates to an unsuccessful performance on that criteria. You'll add the scores for trial 1 and trial 2 together, and then record that score in the score column on the far right-hand side of the record sheet. And then you'll add up each of the score values for each skill. So for run, for example, you'll add 2 plus 0 plus 1 plus 1, and you'll get a skill score of 4 for run. And similarly for gallop, skill scores of 1 plus 1 plus 0 plus 0 will equate to a skill score for gallop of a 2. And then you would complete that for all of the skills in the locomotor subtest. And at the bottom, you would then record the locomotor total raw score for each of the 6 skills. And then that raw score is what you would complete in Section 2 of the record form on the front page. You'd also do the same set of procedures for the ball skills subtest. I have simply turned over the record form to the final page. I provided an example for the overhand throw. Again, you'd add the scores for trial 1 and 2 together to get your total score skill for that performance criteria. You would add, in this case, the total score of 1 plus 0 plus 2 plus 1 to give you a skill score for the overhand throw of 4. And again, for all of the items in the ball skills subtest, you would then record their total raw score in the box at the bottom, and then enter that data on the front of the record sheet. Just a little sample data here for a student I named Mark. The date tested was 2019, the 3rd month, the 1st day, so March 1st of 2019. His birthday was 9/4/2012. And to determine the chronological age, we simply do some math. We take away the birth date day from the date tested day, the months, and then the years. And so we work from right back to left. I can't take 4 away from 1, so I have to borrow 31 days from the month category. So the 3 for the month now becomes 2 because I've taken 1 month away. And so I add 30 days, actually, 30 days to the 1, and I get 31 days. And now I can take 4 away from 31, which gives me Mark's chronological days, 27 days in the day column. In the month column, so now we have 2 months. He was born in the 9th month. I cannot take 9 months away from 2 months, so I need to borrow a year. I need to borrow 12 months from the year category. So 12 months plus 2 months equals 14 months. So now I can take 9 away from 14 and I get 5 months. So right now Mark is 5 months, 27 days chronological age. And so since I borrowed a year from 2019, it now becomes 2018. And I can take 2012 away from 2018, and I can get 6 years, 5 months, and 27 days. So when we go into the norming tables, we now have a chronological age of 6 years, 5 months, from which we can gather data on Mark if we're using the Tgmd3 as a norm reference test. Here would be subtest scores using the chronological age of 6 years, 5 months for Mark on some data that I just provided. So if he scored 17 in the locomotor area for raw score, I'll show you how to find the age equivalent, the percentile rank, and the scaled score for each of these subtests to come up with the data that I've provided right here. So we clearly have to make sure we're using the correct norming table. So the title of table B1 is converting the subtest raw scores to the age equivalents, which is the first category on the record sheet. And so you have to be able to then also look at the correct sex. So clearly we're looking for a male, and the locomotor raw score was 17. So I like to block off all of the unused parts of the table just to make it easier and more accurate for me. So I identified the 17 raw score for the locomotor, and I move over to the age equivalency, and I find 3 years, 6 months. So that is the age equivalency that I will put on the front of the record form. And then I will go to the ball skills, and the ball skills for Mark, a male, was 13. So that's clearly less than 17. Age equivalency is less than 3 years, 0 months. On this table C1, you're going to use it to collect your percentile ranks, your scaled scores, and your confidence intervals for males if you choose to gather that data. So in this table, we look at and use Mark's chronological age, which was 6 years, 5 months. So we look at this category, 6 years, 5 months. And then we, again, this is for locomotor skills. So we look at his raw score of 17 at 6 years, 5 months. When we get to 17, you might choose to block off all of the rows below that so you're clear and accurate. If we move over to the left, you would find his percentile rank at 5. And again, it's percentile rank, not percentage, percentile rank. And you would move to the right, and you would find his scale score of 5. And then if you're choosing to do your confidence intervals, there are those values. You would also then use a similar table, C3, For the ball skills, and again, looking for his chronological age, 6 years, 5 months. Ball skills, he scored 13. Percentile rank is 1. Scaled score is 3. And so you could then see, back on our record sheet, 3 years, 6 months for age equivalency in the locomotor test at a percentile rank of 5, a scaled score of 5. For the ball skills, less than 3 years, 0 months for the age equivalency, a percentile rank of 1, a scaled score of 3. You simply add the two scaled scores together to come up with 8, and then you transfer your sum of scaled scores to section 3, and then I go to the norming table and look up the sum of scaled scores to obtain a percentile rank of 1, a gross motor index of 65, and then I can look gross motor index of 65, index score below 70, gives me a descriptive term of impaired or delayed, which I can put in that location on the form. So now that you've seen a little bit about scoring and how to score on the record form, how to use the norming tables, just a recap or a refresher on that if you have used the Tgmd2 in the past. The final part of my presentation, I really want to focus on the connection of using the Tgmd3 as a way to determine eligibility for Dape services in the state of Minnesota. And so thankfully, this part of the presentation talks about Minnesota Rule 3525.1352. And for those of you that are familiar with this rule, good for you. For those that didn't know it existed, then this might be a bit of helpful knowledge that can reiterate our procedures and processes here in the state of Minnesota. So in order to be eligible for receiving Dape services, we have to have students meet some criteria. That just makes sense, as in every other state. And our state has nicely outlined two parts, Part A and Part B of the eligibility criteria. And Part A is simply that the student has to have a diagnosed disability as outlined in the rule, very clearly identifies the various disability categories in that part of the rule. The Part B eligibility criteria does consist of two parts, and you get to pick, as the Dape teacher, which part you would like to use in determining eligibility for a particular student. And the Tgmd3 fits nicely into either Part B1 or Part B2. So if you're going to use the Tgmd3 as a Part B1 assessment, good for you. It is the norm referenced assessment component of the Minnesota eligibility criteria. So you would go through, as I showed you in the earlier videos, all of the norming tables. You would calculate their percentile rank, you would get their standard scores, and you would see, are they 1.5 standard deviations or more below the mean. Remember that the 7th percentile equates to 1.5 standard deviations below the mean. So you would know by looking at the percentile rank, if it's the 7th percentile or less, they would be eligible as part of this B1 criteria for Dape services in the state of Minnesota. If you choose not to use the norm referenced function of the Tgmd3, Part B2 assessments to determine eligibility would be your next best bet. And so again, based upon our rule, you need to use 2 or more of these following items in order to determine if a student would be eligible for Dape services. So there's 8 items: motor and skills checklists, informal tests, criterion referenced measures, deficits in achievement related to the defined curriculum, medical history or reports, parent and staff interviews, a systematic observation, and social, emotional, or behavioral assessments. So your job is to pick any two or more of these from which you can administer to the student in order to see and assess, is their achievement adequate or inadequate for their success in general physical education. And so I'm suggesting that you could use 3 of these B2 assessments via the Tgmd3. So if you're going to do the B1 assessment, you're going to use the norming tables and determine the percentile rank. You must administer the Tgmd3 according to all of the administration guidelines. You have to use it for the age range that the test was designed for. You have to use the equipment that it's asking you to use for each of the items. You have to give the exact number of trials, the direct demonstration, the practice trial. You have to give everything according to the guidelines provided in the administration manual, so that the norms that you use, the norming tables that you use, are most valid. If you want to use the Tgmd3 as a Part B2 assessment, then again, I think it fits nicely in the motor and skills checklist category. You can take the particular items off of the Tgmd3, create a checklist, and administer that to a student. And if you want to administer some of the items, not all of the items, we now have an informal test. Maybe you want to give 3 practice trials instead of only 1 because of the nature of the student that you're assessing. So it's not a formal test anymore. We can't use the norming tables because we've given more practice trials than what was allowed. And so now it automatically becomes an informal test. Maybe you want to administer the Tgmd3 to a student who is older or outside the range, the age range on the norming tables. Perfect. Then it becomes an informal test. And then lastly, I see the possibility of using the Tgmd3 as a Part B2 assessment, as this criterion references measures, because it has criterion within each of the skills that you are asking the students to do. Can they meet the criterion, yes or no? So I think it fits nicely as an assessment instrument for both our Minnesota eligibility criteria for Part B1 as well as Part B2. And it really just is what you want to make of it in terms of which category you would like to use it to determine your eligibility for your student. And I hope this slide and the next slide might be helpful. But in teaching a Dape assessment class, I always like to provide students with lots of opportunities to view video and stop video, assess skills, etc. And Drs. Ulrich and Webster have produced these videos that you could use to just watch Dr. Ulrich go through the administration of this test, what that might look like. But then we've got 4 participant videos here that you could use to practice your scoring. So they are actually having children go through the test items. And so could you take your score sheet and score the participants right alongside of them? And this video, I think, is excellent in terms of its identification of common or typical errors that we might see. And so again, if they're useful, you can click the link. I put the PowerPoint in Schedule. And so you can just access the links through that. And then the last resource slide where you could find it. So you could, again, Google or just hit on this link. But to know that it's relatively affordable. It's clearly not free. But for $150, you can get 25 record forms plus the examiner manual. If you just need the record forms, they do sell a pack of 25 for $60 and the manual separately for $90. So it's really not any savings to get the kit. But again, hopefully you can see that the Tgmd3 is a valid and reliable instrument. It has components in 2 subtest categories. And for the Dape teachers in Minnesota, you could use it to determine eligibility for Dape services, either as a B1 or a B2 assessment, and it fits nicely in either one. Let me know if you have any questions about the Tgmd 3 or any of the resources that I provided in this session. Thanks for listening.